Dear reader, I'm Tony and this is Book Text. Today I'm doing something a little different. I'm trying to be creative. Emily Dickinson is one of my favorite poets. I feel like she and I would be kindred sisters, bosom sisters, as Anne of Green Gables would say. And I am going to pull a few lines from some of her most popular poems and attach them to a book that I love. So in this way, Emily Dickinson is kind of helping to review some of my favorite books. But first, our word of the day today is a word that Emily Dickinson used. The word is shriven. Shriven is an adjective. It comes from the word to scribe, which means, of course, to write. But shriven means confessed or washed clean. And it can also actually mean sentenced to death or sanctified. So it has this kind of interesting nuance to it. No wonder Emily Dickinson used it. So shriven, great poetic word. Okay, the first poem that I selected is a very hopeful poem. It is "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul," and I could go on. But the line that I'm selecting from it is, "I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea." So hope in kind of a far-flung, dangerous place. And the book that I thought kind of represented that line is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. And this is the copy that I had in college. I actually took a college course on Lord of the Rings, and that was amazing. But this is the edition that I read there. It is all of the books. It's so floppy, so big. And I think this book, it does take you to quite far away, dangerous places in the mind and physically. And yet there is such a strong sense of hope. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, Sam's speech near the end of Return of the King, when it seems like there's no possible way they could win. And he just speaks about what they're holding on to, right? What they hope for in the future, and that hope for returning to the Shire and seeing the people that they love is what is able to carry them through to the end of their journey. So I think Emily Dickinson would love The Lord of the Rings, besides the fact that Tolkien very much advocated in this book for a love of nature and better treatment of nature, which Emily Dickinson writes so much about nature. She loved her little garden. So Lord of the Rings, for hope is the thing with feathers. And the second poem that I chose, one of my favorites, because for some reason the lines come to my head quite frequently, and I don't know what that says about me, but the poem is called "Because I Could Not Stop for Death." And the lines that I selected are from the very beginning of the poem. "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me." So for this, I thought about a book that had kind of a maybe surprising but gentle, kind death being represented. And I selected The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. And this story is quite popular. It talks about characters living in Germany during World War II. And the narrator is Death himself. And he's got quite a character. I would love to meet this Death. He does not seem scary. He is quite gentle, quite kind, kind of a soft person. And there's, you know that characters are going to die. He warns you. He tells you at the very beginning, this is how it's going to end. And so it kind of gently leads you into this, like, I don't know, it made me think about death a lot differently. And so did Emily Dickinson's poem. So I think she would appreciate seeing death be, first of all, a person, which she personifies him in her poems a lot, and a gentle person. So there's another recommendation. Okay, the third Emily Dickinson poem is called "There's a Certain Slant of Light." I just love that phrase. The line that I picked from this is, "Heavenly hurt it gives us We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. So for this, I thought about a book that changed me internally and that kind of, wounded my soul in experiencing the challenges and trials of the characters. And I chose another World War II book. I'm sorry, I know it's the industry is saturated with World War II books, but there are some real gems in there. And this is Ruta Sepetys' Salt to the Sea, which is the story of some World War II refugees and their journey to safety. But it's told from such a unique perspective that I had not considered. I didn't even know that these people existed in a state of seeking refuge. So we've got characters from Poland and Ukraine and Prussia, and they are actually fleeing from the Soviets and the Americans. And so a rare perspective to see the Americans be the bad guy in a World War II book. This really, hurt me internally, made me think differently about kind of things that I find heroic or things that I value. And there's some really sad things, some horrible things that happen. I just think that Emily Dickinson would have appreciated the internal struggle that you have when you read Salt to the Sea. Highly recommend. Okay, the next poem is another death poem. No surprise, surprise. I heard a fly buzz when I died. That's the name of the poem. And the line that I selected is, the stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. So I read a lot of kind of heavy books, and I thought about, what is a book that provides some stillness or some lightness, some levity between heavier reads. And I selected a book from the interwar period, set in the interwar period. So this, those were definitely heaves of storms, both wars. And this book is actually the prequel to a World War II book, yet again, codenamed Verity, and the companion novel Rose Under Fire. Both are really heavy, dark, scary, intense reads. But this one is very lighthearted. This is The Pearl Thief by Elizabeth Wein. This is the story of Julia Beaufort Stewart, who plays a large role in Codename Verity. And this is her adventures one summer as a 15-year-old at her late grandfather's estate in Scotland. And she goes on adventures and she meets new friends, and kind of there's a bit of mystery happening. It's just a lot of stillness, enjoying the Scottish summer landscape, enjoying being with people and loving people. And what's going to happen to Julia during the war, and kind of what's going to happen to the other people, most likely during the war. But this book just provided that moment of stillness between the heaves of storm that I think Emily Dickinson would approve of. And, the next poem is I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. Just thinking about these titles makes me love Emily so much. The line from this, I selected kind of an odd line. It's, then space began to toll as all the heavens were a bell. And I thought about this one, and I wanted to interpret it literally as space, because I read quite a bit of science fiction, especially set in space. I love a good space opera. So I thought about this line referring to a deep book set in space, one where I can kind of hear the bells toll for whatever that means to you. For me, it represents kind of hard things happening. So this is going to sound odd, but I chose for this a Star Wars novelization. This is Rogue One by Alexander Freed. this is my favorite Star Wars movie of all time. I think because it's kind of stepping back from the epic nature of Star Wars and looking at a small group of people who really are just normal people. There are no Jedis in this group, and yet they're able to kind of put aside their small lives to make one last good act for the overall betterment of the universe. I hear the bells toll when I read this. Every time a character dies, there are the bells tolling for them. This book makes me cry. I've read it multiple times. Star Wars novelizations are actually pretty good books. If you've never tried one and you enjoy science fiction and you enjoy Star Wars and you want more Star Wars, read a Star Wars novelization. They're pretty good books. So this one is my deep book set in space. I think because of its kind of more ambiguous ending, not ambiguous so much as bittersweet ending, right, where there's happy things happening and sad things happening. I think Emily appreciates that it's not just one clean, happy ending, but that there's good and bad involved at the same time. She would probably love this book. If I can now I have this image in my head of bringing Emily Dickinson to like a Star Wars marathon. Just think about that for a minute. I'm going to tantalize myself with that image. Okay, the last poem is related to books. It is There Is No Frigate Like a Book. And which was a great poem if you love books and love reading. The line that I'm choosing is from the end of this poem. It is, "How frugal is the chariot that bears a human soul." So for this, I thought about a beloved book that bears my soul cheaply, frugally. And for this, I chose Persuasion by Jane Austen. It is my favorite Jane Austen book. I think there's something so appealing about the idea of waiting and being patient and being loyal and faithful and as they would say in one of my World War II novels, holding a torch for someone for a long time. And I actually have 5 editions of Persuasion because it's one of my favorites. And so they range from kind of really gorgeous editions, more hardy editions, to an annotated edition. This is the thickest edition I have. Kitty cat. One moment. I'll get to him in a minute. Oxford World Classics. This is to match the rest of my classics collection. I have a Signet Classic, just kind of a small copy. I liked the color choices on here. But my favorite edition is the one that was the cheapest. It is my Dover Thrift edition of Persuasion. This is the one that I purchased for my literature class, one of my literature classes in college. The first time that I read Persuasion, I read this copy, and it probably cost me $1. I don't remember. I just love the kind of unusual fabric pattern on the front. And, it's the Dover Thrifts, they're cheap for a reason, but there's a pretty good feel to it. Oh, and I found a note I left to myself. From Tuesday, February 2nd, 2010, I've written something on the back about a word that I loved. Oh, now I'm going to have to go find where that word comes from. The things you discover. There's a Flight for Life helicopter going over my head right now. I live right near a hospital. I hope whoever's on there is okay. So anyway, I think that Emily Dickinson would, I don't know if she read Persuasion, but I think she would have loved it. I think she would have loved that I have a beloved book bought so cheaply because it's a frugal chariot that bears my soul. Thank you for watching Emily Dickinson reviews. I just thought I wanted to do something to honor Emily and to have a little bit of fun and share some of my favorite books. If you want to do something like this, feel free. I'm not copywriting this kind of practice, but it's just fun. Maybe you can pick another author or poet or something just for fun. Remember, there's always another book.